Good afternoon, New York, and welcome to everyone tuning in from around the world. My name is Nicholas Manousis. I'm the Executive Director of the Horological Society of New York, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here to our May lecture. As usual, let's begin with some announcements. You may have noticed a new logo on our sponsorship grid. Today, I'm very happy to welcome Nomos Glashütte as a new sponsor of the Horological Society of New York. The support from Nomos will aid HSNY in continuing to expand our educational programming and financial aid opportunities. Nomos joins the now very large group of 20 corporate sponsors of HSNY. And HSNY thanks all of our corporate sponsors for their generous support. And I'm also very happy to announce today that the Horological Society of New York and the Alliance of British Watch and Clock Makers have established a partnership. The goal of this partnership is to further the mutual interests of both nonprofit organizations through close collaboration. I encourage all HSNY members to join the British Alliance and support the important work that they're doing. More details on this new partnership will be announced tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. And I'm very happy to announce the dates for our 2021 charity auction. It's going to be June 7th through the 14th, so it's a week-long online auction. And of course, it's going to be hosted by our good friends at Philips. So we're really looking forward to this very special auction with a lot of incredible, unique timepieces. So mark that on your calendar, June 7th through 14th with Philips, and watch for more details on this auction to be announced very, very soon. Okay, so now this is one of my favorite things to announce all year, the results of our financial aid, our scholarships, and our awards. So for 2021, HSNY awarded $70,000 in financial aid. We received 37 applications from 8 students and, well, 37 applications received, 8 students and 4 schools were awarded. Now this is a record. And to put it into some context, what these numbers actually mean, this is the majority of all watchmaking students and schools in the USA. So this was a 32% increase in financial aid compared to 2020. And we're really happy with these results. And we have to thank our members and our sponsors for making this all possible. Really, without the incredible support from our members and sponsors, none of this would be possible. So we're looking forward to continuing expanding our financial aid opportunities every year in the future. So thank you again. Oh, actually, I've got to show one more slide here. Here's the winners. Here are all the individual scholarship winners and the schools that received the awards. So congratulations to all of the winners for 2021. Look forward to seeing your watchmaking careers develop, and we look forward to seeing these schools teach more and more watchmaking students the art and science of horology. All right, now on to today's lecture. Jaquet Droz has an incredible history that includes more than just timepieces. Today, we will take a close look at the history of this famous brand with Dr. Sandrine Girardier and Grégoire Boillat. Dr. Sandrine Girardier wrote her thesis on the histories of the watchmakers Jaquet Droz and Les Chaux and obtained her doctorate in 2018. As a museum curator, she has devoted herself for more than 10 years to the management of collections and the creation of exhibitions. In her work as a freelance historian, she also specializes in various heritage collections, as well as undertaking cultural and educational activities, all while continuing research and publication. Grégoire Boillat completed his watchmaking degree in Le Locle, Switzerland, and started his career by working on the production lines of a famous chronometer brand. He then specialized in customer service and vintage watch restoration. Grégoire is also a part-time teacher in the Le Locle Watchmaking School and has been working for Jaquet Droz for 10 years. His passion for the brand and antique pieces gave him the opportunity to be the curator of the brand's museum collection. And he's now in charge of the demonstrations, new acquisitions, and customer support for vintage and antique pieces. For today's lecture, Dr. Girardier will discuss the main phases of the careers of Pierre and Henri-Louis Jaquet Droz during the second half of the 18th century. Dr. Girardier's lecture will be enhanced by live demonstrations of special collection pieces currently at the Jaquet Droz Maison by Grégoire Boillat. I am pleased to welcome Dr. Sandrine Girardier and Grégoire Boillat to lecture at the Horological Society of New York. Take it away, Sandrine.
Thank you, Nick, for your very kind introduction. And so, as I said, my very hearty thanks to the Horological Society of New York, and particularly to Carolina Navarro and Nick Manousos for the support and for such a nice introduction. And of course, good afternoon, everybody. I am thrilled that I am given today the opportunity to present some aspects of my doctoral research that I finished back in 2018. My thesis has been published last year in French, I'm afraid, but I was also involved into another project to celebrate Pierre Jaquet Droz's 300th anniversary, led by Montres Jaquet Droz, where we are now, in order to write a book destined to a wider public and richly illustrated too. And I'm glad to say that this version has been translated into English. It is the second book cover on this slide for those of you who would be interested. And I also take this opportunity to address all my thanks to the whole Jaquet Droz team for their confidence and support. But let's now get down to business and talk about these famous watchmakers. Indeed, and to start with a slightly rhetorical question, who hasn't heard at least once about the Jaquet Droz, these two 18th century clock and watchmakers born in Chaux-de-Fonds in the Neuchâtel mountains, and whose two portraits appear on this slide? I will have to guess your reaction since I can't see your faces, but I know that for watchmakers, scholars, and enthusiasts, this name holds a special place in history as well as in collective memory. At least in the region where I live, that is to say the Neuchâtel canton, situated in the French-speaking part of Switzerland, which clearly explains my accent, the patronym Jaquet Droz, that has been extinct for many decades, if not centuries, functions as a nearly perfect synonym of the automatons they built during the second half of the 18th century. If it is obvious to say that the Jaquet Droz and their automaton epitomize the industrial and technical fabric of this region, where watchmaking is still persistent today, their technical journey, of course, doesn't end there. No worries though, I will come back to the automatons later on. Meanwhile, you can have a glimpse at the three Jaquet Droz androids as you may see them at the Musée d'Art et d'Histoire of Neuchâtel. Although the automatons are extraordinary technical artifacts that not only have been preserved through the centuries, but are actually in working order, there is another word connected to these watchmakers that almost equally springs to mind. And I suggest it is the exclusiveness of their clock and watchmaking production. Of course, they were not alone in this game, but the name Jaquet Droz always have and still arouses enthusiasm in relation to the techniques that their production convenes, whether linked to timekeeping, animation, or decoration. You have here a pell-mell mosaic of some Jaquet Droz pieces. I will be spending some time commenting a few models, and as anticipated, Grégoire Boillat will be showing a few items after my presentation and will certainly enhance certain points that will have been treated today. But enough spoilers for the moment. Let me set the frame to this history by evoking the main phases of their careers. This will allow me to focus on the way their workshops in Chaux-de-Fonds, in London and in Geneva operated on a local first, national later, and finally international scale. It will also be the occasion to touch upon the networks they shaped through the decades and on the way the Jaquet Droz Society managed to sell most of its models as far as China. I will start, of course, with Pierre Jaquet Droz. He was born in 1721, which, as anticipated, means that this year is his 300th anniversary in La Chaux-de-Fonds. And you can see here the farm where he was born that is located in the city. He was born into a family that had been established in the region since the 15th century. His forefathers managed to acquire riches and land, as was also the case, of course, of other local families who would later fully engage in clock and watchmaking. But at the beginning, Pierre Jaquet Droz was actually destined to become a clergyman, and he therefore studied in Basel, where he met learned personalities who certainly had an impact in his later technical choices. But luckily for watchmaking, Pierre took another path than religion. His introduction into clockmaking has often been very much romanticized. The tendency to do so has been very strong from the second half of the 19th century onwards. But on the other hand, information about this phase is more than scarce. We know, however, that his family and social background favored his training, supposedly achieved between 1740 and 1747. Before watchmaking became predominant in the Neuchâtel mountains, economy was ruled by cattle farming and by handicraft, among which lace making and its related commercial networks were very important. Metalworking know-how first concerned weapons and locksmithing, before spreading to watchmaking around the mid-18th century, when London, Paris, and Geneva were actually the watchmaking hubs. Watchmaking introduction in the region is said to have derived from Geneva, just as the waves of Huguenot immigration, and therefore Protestant immigration, is used to explain the city's watchmaking boom. But we know now that these industrial deep transformations are always the result of much more complex processes implying technical and commercial influences over the time. Still, when Pierre Jaquet Droz had supposedly finished his training as a clockmaker, so a little bit before 1750, La Chaux-de-Fonds was a village of nearly 2,300 or so inhabitants, but nearly 200 of them were already worked in the several and already much specialized clock and watchmaking fields, which actually roughly corresponds to 9% of the population. By the end of the century, the 18th, of course, the population had doubled, and then nearly 30% of them were either clock or watchmakers, goldsmiths, engravers, dial or hand makers, or producers of most of the smaller parts necessary to the making and decoration of clocks and watches. The absence of a clock or watchmaking guild in La Chaux-de-Fonds, contrary to what existed in most cities in Europe, but again, La Chaux-de-Fonds can barely be considered as a city at the time, is traditionally said to have encouraged this technical and industrial spread. Of course, other elements can be brought forward, like the presence of a fairly qualified but inexpensive workforce, like the possibility to raise capital in relation to the possession of land, or like the ties that existed between the members of the community, composed of locals and emigrants, both firmly attached to their native towns, and of course open to explore international markets, which the Jaquet Droz, of course, did as well. Getting back to Pierre Jaquet Droz, he is mentioned in a 1749 community ledger as, and I will quote this in French, très expert horloger en gros. You can see it on the first two lines of this document on this slide. Basically, it can be roughly translated into English as highly expert large-scale timepiece producer. According to this document, Pierre paid for several cabinets and consoles in the French, English, and Spanish styles, which denotes the diversity of the markets he targeted during the first phase of his activity. Meanwhile, he worked on several majestic clocks that he brought to the court of Spain in 1758. This highly successful commercial journey indeed launched his international renown. Of course, the first and most direct accomplishment was the sale to King Ferdinand VI of 5 clocks, among which was the famous Shepherd's clock, which you can see on this slide. And this is an extract of the book that I have been talking just earlier. Obtaining the possibility to sell watchmaking articles in Spain was another essential aspect, and it seems that it helped put the Neuchâtel Mountains on the international watchmaking production map. Given the lack of apprenticeship contracts regarding the family in question here, which is hardly surprising since there was no legal obligation in this respect, it is tough to gather details about the material, social, and temporal conditions about the passing on of technical expertise within the Jaquet Droz circle. Still, we know that Pierre Jaquet Droz quickly involved his son, Henri-Louis, in the workshop's activities, and that Jean-Frédéric Lechaud, which was a particularly skilled neighbor, soon joined the workshop too. And also that other, although not necessarily permanent workers, collaborated on specific projects, of course, like the automatons. The names of these few workers pop out from certain documents relating to Pierre Jaquet Droz's workshop in Chaux-de-Fonds, such as a notarial document that tells us at what construction phase the automatons were in 1774. Pierre Jaquet Droz had this document written down in order to settle things right before his son Henri-Louis Jaquet Droz took things in his own hands, business matters. This extraordinary document tells us at least two things. The first one is that Pierre and Henri-Louis Jaquet Droz were not the sole makers of the androids, and this is all the more interesting since history seems to have erased most of the names that orbited around the Jaquet Droz workshops. And the second point is that the automatons were of great importance to Pierre Jaquet Droz. Not only do they symbolize an incredible technical feat, but they also signify the amount of time and money that had been put into this project, which was then, of course, expected to pay off. It was therefore essential to settle things before they left La Chaux-de-Fonds for good. And the reason they left La Chaux-de-Fonds was to form and exhibit a spectacle mécanique. This was an itinerant mechanical show, which was advertised by French and English leaflets. You have two of them appearing on the slide. And they actually advertised the show, which was exhibited first in Paris, then in London, then in Ghent, today's Belgium, again in Paris, in Lyon, and finally in Geneva, before they were eventually sold to other demonstrators who kept touring them for money, of course. But let's now have a closer look to the automatons. The first one to be built by Pierre Jaquet Droz is the Writer. It is an automaton since it contains the principle of its movements. It is an android because it has a human shape, and it is a writer because it can write whatever text, not exceeding 40 characters, of the Latin alphabet. It has the shape of a child sitting on a stool, writing on a mahogany desk, and with its quill it writes the pre-programmed text, which is also why it is also considered to be one of the first computers in history. The draughtsman is formally similar to the writer. It has 3 sets of interchangeable cams, allowing it to draw the portraits of George III and Queen Charlotte of England, the portrait of Louis XV, a dog called Mon Toutou, my doggy in English, and a butterfly pulling a chariot with a cherub. You probably have heard or even seen, which is not my case unfortunately, the Franklin Institute of Philadelphia Draughtsman Writer Automaton by Henri Maillardet. Sources indeed talk about the collaboration between the Jaquet Droz and the Maillardet family, in particular regarding to the construction of other androids. And it's certainly interesting to consider that the action of writing and drawing have been put together for this later mechanical realization. But getting back to the first androids, we now have the harpsichord player, which completes the trio of the Jaquet Droz first androids. This time, the machine represents a young girl sitting on its organ, displaying articulated fingers that actually activate the levers and which allow it to really exert a pressure on the keyboard and therefore plays 5 different tunes. There are 2 options for those of you wishing to spend some more time seeing these automatons in function. The first and probably the most exciting one is to come and see them at the Musée d'Art et d'Histoire in Neuchâtel when travel becomes truly possible again, or to check out the video YouTube, which will be shared later on, which also gives valuable information about the restoration they went through in 2012. The fourth automaton of the Jaquet Droz show is not an android, but a grotto. It has not been preserved, unfortunately, and the only visual witness of this machine seems to be this etching that appears now on the slide by the engraver Balthazar Antoine Dunker. As it appears here, the grotto is composed of formal gardens adorned with statues in the antique style, together with dancers. On a Renaissance pedestal is a rock composition, the grotto, which features a pastoral romantic scene. The three androids, wearing what are presumably their original clothes, are also represented here, although of course not in scale. The first stop of the mechanical spectacle was Paris, but the main destination seems to have always been London, where the automaton started to be shown in Covent Garden at the end of the year 1775. In this next slide, you can see an advertisement of the mechanical spectacle published in several London announcements newspapers. The address, opening days and hours, as well as the price of entrance are specified here. But the point where I want to draw your attention is the fascinating nota bene in the second half of the advertisement. I quote, "Mr. Jaquet Droz has constructed hands for a person born with stumps only. They are contrived in such a manner that from the strength as well as the flexibility of the various joints, he can use the knife and fork or manage the reins in riding or driving, and even write with great freedom. Mr. Jaquet Droz flatters himself that he can materially assist many persons who have lost any of their limb or are lame from weakness in their joints." End of quote. This remarkable passage tells us that although the automatons were the key attraction of the show, Henri-Louis Jaquet Droz used it as a showcase of the technical skills necessary to make other types of mechanical items. Clocks, watches, snuff boxes, bird cages, of course, but also prosthetic arms and legs, which Leschaud would continue to make afterwards, as shown by this later sketch. Indeed, the mechanical spectacle brought renown to the Jaquet Droz, and it allowed them to better understand the demand on the international markets, notably those connected with London. And you can well imagine that if they decided to set up a workshop there, there was no coincidence at all. You all know that London was at the time an international hub for commerce, with a strongly established technical reputation for clock and watchmaking, tool making, and scientific instrument making as well. The encounter of Henri-Louis Jaquet Droz with James Cox, whose career has been studied by historians Ian White and Roger Smith, was also instrumental in the opening of a Jaquet Droz workshop in London, in Bartlett's buildings. You can see an image of these buildings, of course, in a quite later watercolor. Cox was a jeweler and dealer in clocks and other luxury mechanical models, which were destined, among other places, to the Far East. He was also known for his museum in Spring Gardens, where he exhibited large and extraordinary mechanical pieces. After this crucial meeting between these two men, a joint commercial project was set up around 1780. The Jaquet Droz company heavily supplying from that moment on the firm James Cox and Son, with small mechanical models richly decorated and equipped with musical devices, ultimately sold in China. After spending 8 years in London, Henri-Louis Jaquet Droz fostered the company by opening another workshop in Geneva with Jean-Frédéric Leschaud as a partner. Watchmaking being essential in Geneva as well, the presence of many enamelers or other painters on enamel, plus the proximity with the Neuchâtel mountains, clearly explain this strategic choice. Henri-Louis Jaquet Droz therefore appointed watchmaker and mechanical engineer Henri Maillardet to head the London workshop. And we are lucky enough to have the agreement between these two men preserved. The document contains 18 articles providing information about their rights and duties and reveal part of the day-to-day running of the workshop. The aim of their association was to continue the production of, I quote, mechanical works, clocks, etc., which will be found suitable by the contractors. From that moment on, responsibility for the management of the workshop fell to Henri Maillardet, although Henri-Louis Jaquet Droz was still deeply involved to determine the broad outlines of the production. Article number 2 is particularly illuminating. I quote again, Henri-Louis Jaquet Droz undertakes to have executed in Switzerland any branch of the mechanical works, clocks, etc., serving to facilitate and advance the execution of the works which will be ordered in London and which can be shipped to England, and to charge them to the company at cost price in Switzerland and without any profit whatsoever. End of quote. You have here a general overview of the 3 Jaquet Droz workshops. As a matter of fact, the complementary nature of these 3 workshops is highlighted by the previous passage and also indicates their capacity to call upon specific expertise according to the models they intended to make. Subcontracting items in Switzerland at a lower cost was certainly a good way to profile the firm as a serious competitor in London. This situation was clearly not to the taste of everybody, at least not for long-term London-based watchmakers, even if recent studies have revealed that intertwining relations between Switzerland and England were rather common from the beginning of the 18th century, often implying the making of English-style watches in Geneva or the smuggling of goods from the continent to avoid custom taxes. The presence of other workers in the London workshop is also mentioned in the agreement, even if the duration of their appointment is not always clear. We know some of them worked more or less permanently and also lived on the premises, as the 1785 London workshop inventory shows by listing the 5 beds that the firm possessed, as well as the names of their occupants, all of them being Swiss artisans living in England. All these documents make it quite clear that the combination of a few permanent workers with a multitude of subcontractors who supplied whatever part was necessary was an integral part of the production process, based on a true flexibility on all the sides. The archives that I could study cover a period of 53 years. Of course, they are uneven in terms of documentation and have gaps. They allow to bring under relative light some 800 stakeholders orbiting around the 3 workshops in Chaux-de-Fonds, London, and Geneva. The chart that appears now splits them into a few subgroups, showing that basically 70% of the Jaquet Droz and Les Chaux network has been involved either in the production, the commerce, or the administrative and financial management of the workshops, the rest concerning the watchmakers' private sociability and other relations. This is certainly worth saying since, as it happens with the great horological names, or non-horological for that matter, the persons composing their networks are, at best, just only mentioned, or often never really recorded and therefore forgotten by history. Of course, cross-mentions are common with such cumulative compilation of data, but these figures can reveal the dispersed nature of a workforce and suggest the way the workshops functioned. As a matter of fact, operations were highly dependent on the elasticity and mobility of the workforce, and on the fluctuations of demands as well, and on the transportation's logistics finally. Actually, the many documents taken into account reveal more nuances than well-established hierarchies, and more variable types of organization than one and only production or commercial model. This can be summarized in French by the expression of fabrique dispersée, dispersed industry in English. Although this configuration may seem chaotic to us, it certainly offered advantages to the stakeholders implied, like limiting financial risk by appointing workers for very specific and often time-limited tasks. Historian Giorgio Riello has pointed out that if this system didn't always allow to have a complete control over the process, especially if it comprised many phases, which was clearly the case with the Jaquet Droz production, it responded nonetheless to a rapidly changing society and to the practical needs of a growingly interconnected community of makers, subcontractors, and merchants. Furthermore, producing under this method allowed entrepreneurs who managed a wide network to take advantage of the strong emulation and a complementarity deployed in several cities and towns. This reality can be perceived in a remarkable excerpt taken from a letter sent by Leschaud from Geneva to Samuel Roy, one of the clockmakers located in La Chaux-de-Fonds and that he worked with. I quote, "I was asked for the exact deadlines and price at which I could supply 2 ebony wood clocks of the Capuchin kind. I presume this means in the English style, with a gold-plated bronze trim and a carillon playing various tunes. One is 18 inches high and the other is 24 inches high. They are to be fitted with Turkish-style dials and English names of the best artists. Perfect work, able to compete with that done by the English." End of quote. Among other aspects, this excerpt shed light on the many stakes and stakeholders implied in this order. First, we have Leschaud, his commissioner whose name is kept quiet, Samuel Roy, and his own workshop. Then we have the market that is targeted, although it's not fully specified, as well as the international competition involved between English reputation and Swiss prices at the time. As briefly mentioned, making English-style watches was common practice, and Leschaud says it quite explicitly to a merchant based in Berlin. I quote again, "As for the snuff box with songbird that you saw, this piece is certainly from our workshop. I had the honor to tell you a few years ago that we make such mechanical items with birds and jewels, such as snuff boxes and flasks. And we constantly had them engraved as if they came from England, because the general opinion is that whatever comes from this country is better made, more refined and solid than anywhere else. However, it is at my workshop that they are made, with the difference that by buying them from me, they will be cheaper than from anyone else." End of quote. Reputation and know-how are at the heart of Leschaud's arguments, without setting aside the inevitable competition among craftsmen and merchants, which is of course something that occurs very often indeed. You may recall that after 1780, the main market targeted by the Jaquet Droz was China. As you know, European demand for Chinese gold, especially tea and porcelain, was very high during the 18th century, with the consequence that trade balances were very much uneven. And despite the number of Western manufactories being set up to produce Chinese-like porcelain or Indian cotton printed locally, those wouldn't change much. In this very context, exporting clock and watchmaking models as well as other fancy mechanical objects became a stake of some importance to keep on trading with China. This led some producers and merchants to take advantage of this niche in order to sell so-called sing-songs, which is an expression that seems to derive from Mandarin, meaning self-sounding bells. These were mechanical items richly embellished and enhanced by musical tunes. As a matter of fact, when Henri-Louis Jaquet Droz took out in London an insurance against the fire for his workshop, his quality is given as musical clockmaker, which clearly has its importance considering this horological slot that Leschaud exploited as well after the death of the two Jaquet Droz. To give you a better idea of this horological slot, I suggest we now have a closer look at some of these pieces. Here is a chiming pocket watch signed Jaquet Droz London on the mechanism. The enameled medallion bears a painted motif of a flower vase on a pedestal and an idealized landscape in the background. As you can see, the case is set with pearls and the sober and elegant dial features the hours, minutes, and seconds hands. This pocket watch actually combines some of the Jaquet Droz specialties: mechanical complications that are, as you know, whatever function telling more than just the hours, musical tunes. You can see on this slide the carillon in the picture in the middle, offering a view of the open watch, as well as a refined enameled decoration, often further enriched with paillons, spangling in English, pearls, and other precious stones. Snuff boxes were also part of the Jaquet Droz production aimed to China. Many of those preserved to this day have been refurbished, and it is sometimes difficult to get a good idea of what they looked like originally. But this piece, signed as well, seems to offer a pretty good picture. It is a novel-shaped snuff box, and despite its name, it was not supposed to contain any tobacco, since it was a precious item of collection. Its enameled medallion features a fashionable pastoral motif. And you can see here another element for which the Jaquet Droz workshops were famous for: singing birds. Once the lid of the case was open, which you can see on the second image of the slide, a miniature songbird would get out, chirp its tune, and flap its wings. In order to adapt to Chinese aesthetics, sing-song models were sold in pairs, with decorations mirroring themselves. If you observe these two pieces, one of which is preserved at the International Watchmaking Museum in Chaux-de-Fonds, and the other at the current Jaquet Droz firm belonging to the Swatch Group, you may notice that the enameled medallion are very similar, but not identical. For instance, the placing of the building on the background slightly differ from one another. One is on the right, the other is on the left. Speculation regarding the fact that one of these watches composing the pairs was intended as a reserve item in case the first broke down has been challenged. First, these objects were part of Chinese collections, a symbol of prestige and wealth. And secondly, it seems that precision in telling the time wasn't so critical in that specific context. The following quote I will be using will allow you to perceive some other items that the London and Geneva workshops were able to make. The excerpt is drawn from a letter, again, that Les Chaux sent to potential clients in 1794. So here it goes. Large clocks with white marble and ore-colored jasper columns adorned with gold ormolu gilded bronze ornamentation in the form of a temple with a waterfall or artificial fountain, with a songbird marking each change of hour. Pocket watches and chiming clocks, ordinary sized cages with songbird as above, and so marking the hours, golden cartels with clock and songbird marking the change of hours, clocks with an animated figure and a set of flutes, astronomical clocks, gold flasks with clock and songbird, round, oval, square, or rectangular cut-cornered snuff boxes with songbird, usually enameled, with a painted medallion featuring small and large beaded border cover, some with a small medallion frame rimmed with brilliant cut diamonds, and ultimately figure-ring watches with clocks adorned with diamonds or pearls. The balance next to the dial, decorated with small roses, performs a charming oscillation. End of quote. As you can imagine, the aim here is to demonstrate the workshop's swirling capacities, which at that point was managed by Les Chaux alone, since both Pierre and Henri-Louis Jaquet Droz had died in 1790 and 1791. The other idea that emerges here is that Les Chaux tries to broaden his trade. Increasing international political and commercial troubles hindered his trade, like that of many other stakeholders at the time. Although at this time, Switzerland was a very important platform for smuggling goods elsewhere, Les Chaux didn't want to limit himself or his business to the Chinese market or to favor London as his only commercial base. Let's have a look at other types of mechanical wonders, like this lyre-shaped table clock placed on a footed pedestal with gold enameled plates, pearls and with a small songbird perched on the top. The bottom of this piece hosts an animated scene, which features small twisted columns of glass. When those are activated, they give the impression of flowing water. Remember, the previous quote speaks about artificial fountains. This is actually a rather beautiful demonstration of what it can have looked like. The animation is completed by two small swans swimming back and forth. The flasks that Les Chaux talks about probably resembled these small and precious table clocks in the shape of perfume flasks and destined to rich and enthusiast collectors. The one shown here features the dial, the balance above, and enameled painted motifs with flower friezes and ribbons. The picture of the open flask indicates that it is also a musical chiming piece. The cages that are listed by Les Chaux are cage-shaped clocks. The dial underneath suggests that they were supposed to be hung by the buckle to the ceiling. The one shown here bears 3 singing birds that are activated at the strike of the hours or on demand by pulling a cord attached to the structure. You may have noticed that the numbers on the dial are written in Arabic, which indicates that on this occasion the target was not China, but most likely Constantinople, where we know that first the Jaquet Droz and then later Les Chaux sold a few cages. This table lists the type and number of objects sold from 1781 to 1811 that I was able to compile. These nearly 700 items mentioned in the accounting archives give another idea of the Jaquet Droz production, but must be considered with precaution. Although they may be higher, avoiding counting duplicates was a major concern. Be that as it may, it was possible to observe that the Chinese market absorbed more than 3/4 of the Jaquet Droz production, the rest being destined to Constantinople, the German states, and through Les Chaux only, Charlestown near Boston, since part of his step-family had a watchmaking business there. I now wish to draw your attention to another fascinating excerpt because of its uniqueness and unbelievable simplicity. In a very laconic sentence, Les Chaux tells Louis-Georges, established in Berlin, that les cadrans sont peints à l'ordinaire sans nom, which in English means that the dials are usually painted without any name. Indeed, this is a central point to consider here. While many mechanisms of clocks bear signatures, most often reading Pierre Jaquet Droz à la Chaux-de-Fonds, those of watches and snuff boxes are more discreet. Even the rare presence of a hallmark attributed to the Jaquet Droz is to be regarded with some care. Not only was it not mandatory in 18th century Geneva, and even less so in La Chaux-de-Fonds at that time, which facilitated the smuggling of Swiss-made models into England, but a given hallmark could have been added later on to enhance the value of a piece on the market. Generally speaking, rare are the late Jaquet Droz models to bear a corresponding signature. Sometimes it is the name of the merchants selling them that seems to be preferred, which makes identification quite tricky to carry out. Remember that during a good decade, if not more, towards the end of the 18th century, Jaquet Droz heavily supplied James Cox and Son, and it seems obvious that those pieces were not signed Jaquet Droz. The following passage further stresses the fact that signature strategies could change with very short notice. I quote again, "I had 4 pairs of watches of this kind made for you, on which I also had your name inscribed, since they were intended for you. But as a result of what you have emphasized, I am going to place other names." End of quote. If Les Chaux is clearly irritated by this seemingly abrupt change of mind from Maillardet, he didn't have much of a choice if he wanted to sell these watches. Thus, communicating that other names will be substituted is an evident hint that competition lurked everywhere and that flexibility was essential for those wishing to stay in the commercial race. And indeed, staying in this race could also mean to be ready and accept to rearranging the fortune of certain items. Leschaud writes in this very respect to his main worker, Jacob Frisard, which was also the main worker of the Jaquet Droz when they lived, and I quote, "You will find here 2 old mechanics that I suppose you refurbished for Mr. Recordon some years ago. Those came back to me through Mr. Courvoisier and Ourier from Le Locle, who sent them to me from him. I know that those pieces belong to my friend, Mr. Félix Laurent, who was an associate of Cox, who came back from China. And since these pieces, which are flasks, had been supplied by my old company, Jaquet Droz and Leschaud, I accepted to receive them and make the inner and outer repairs. The enamels are terribly damaged. I think these pieces are even in worse condition than the first time they were sent to be repaired. Be that as it may, I thought that you could repair the bellows, and you could send the rest to your worker of Joux, which is another region of the Jura Mountains, so that he could remake most of the screws and whatever else is necessary. It seems that those pieces, as well as the watches that I have removed, showing of course that watches will be put together by Leschaud, they have been soaked in salty water and they couldn't have been worse ill-treated. End of quote. In the end, these intricate and costly technical, logistical, and accounting acrobatics were carried out to reintegrate the models into the commercial loops and finally to achieve the sale. These are just a few examples of the extraordinary complexity of the clock and watchmaking world that I was able to gather from the Jaquet Droz and Leschaud case study. Producing and trading networks highlight this, but all that concerns repairs and refurbishments show it even more patently. And these phases also imply an impressive number of workers, sometimes named by their names, but otherwise only just mentioned as the workers. Making luxury timepieces obviously demands many skills, which expose the phases and coordination needed between them. And indeed, the archival corpus that I could examine unveils the functioning of the workshops and reveals some fascinating shades on watchmaking luxury production, which is far from being a monolithic reality. Of course, claims about perfection and exclusiveness occur as often as mentions on the pragmatism necessary to run the business. Indeed, stakeholders are often forced to renegotiate rules and processes depending on the period, the situation, or the partner involved. The dispersed industry offers great flexibility, allows the optimization of certain tasks, call upon interconnected skilled workers, and permits to some extent to profit from competitive prices. In return, the same elasticity presents some drawbacks, like having to regularly search for qualified partners or to take the risk of being copied by competitors and to adapt to rapidly changing tastes of clients. Like many others, the Jaquet Droz and Leschaud workshop relied on existing networks to produce and trade, as well as shaping new ones. When necessary, they took advantage of the renown of others, which didn't hinder the development of their own renown. And this, even though many of the pieces made in their workshop don't bear their signature. By fully integrating the so-called dispersed industry, not only did they manage to have a wide assortment of timepieces made for them, but they could target certain clients' ranges as well. Even if this lack of signature can be regretted, it actually highlights a common practice during the 18th century, and it underlines their understanding of the stakeholders' roles and their sharp manner to coordinate the phases required to make, sell, and refurbish luxurious mechanical items. The documents that historians manage to analyze often disrupt the glorious history of watchmaking. Those I had the privilege to study indeed expose the trimming reality of the 18th century watchmaking ecosystem that also encompasses the activities of the Jaquet Droz and Leschaud related to learned societies and their wish to contribute to the advancement of society, therefore approaching technology through a much wider angle. Just remember the arms and legs they could produce that I just hinted about earlier on. Although the flawlessness of the past biographies devoted to the Jaquet Droz, among others, is somehow dated, I believe that their intuition, skill, and charisma are as essential to renew the understanding of their history as is a comprehensive reading of their complex surrounding and context. Before I hand it over to Grégoire Boillat, who will offer a live demonstration of certain magnificent collection pieces signed or attributed to Jaquet Droz, together with a contemporary item drawing inspiration from the 18th century, as does the Jaquet Droz firm today, after having been revived and integrated into the Swatch Group in 2000. I wish to thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward for the forthcoming discussion. Thank you again, and Grégoire, à toi.
I am Grégoire Boillat, and I will present you today some watches from the history of Jaquet Droz through the time. So, enough speaking, maybe just jump to the demonstration. So, first piece I wanted to show you today is a pocket watch from around 1775 or late 80s. It's a deadbeat second pocket watch, so it's pretty representative of the Jaquet Droz work of this period. It's under the London period, and I will show you the different parts of this watch. So first thing you can notice is the jumping second. The deadbeat is a stoppable deadbeat. You can start it or stop it. You can consider the deadbeat second invention as an ancestor of the chronograph. So the invention of the deadbeat second is attributed to I forget the name. It was released in 1775, and Jaquet Droz introduced this complication in his production very early. So you can open the watch here, and you have this little lever down there, and you can move it to stop the second, and you can start it again like this. So you can use it to chronometer some events, and as we know it was used in sailing to determine the speed of a boat. So let's have a look on the other side of this pocket watch. You have a classical enamel medal, which maybe have been added to this watch later, because the original one might have been damaged, and we are not sure of the originality of this one. And here you have the signature. I hope this will focus on the signature. Okay, it is. So the watch is signed Jaquet Droz and Les Chaux, London. You have two winding square here, one for the deadbeat second and one for the main watch movement. I have restored this watch in 7 years ago, sorry. I will try to open the mechanism to show you the inside of the watch. So, as you can see, the movement were pretty well decorated. You have an engravement on it with a floral decoration, which was the trend in the 18th century. I hope the focus will be okay. Yes. And the deadbeat second mechanism, as mentioned before, previously, is completely independent of the main watch mechanism. So that means you have two barrels and you need to wind them both to have the watch working perfectly. Of course, you have gold hands. You can notice how detailed it is. It's very fine. And of course, an enamel dial with Roman numerals on it. About the case, I just forget to mention the pearl setting you have on the bezel and on the back. And it's pretty common, as you will notice on the next watch I will present you. So, let's jump to the second watch. It's pretty close to the preview one. As you can see, for the front side, the dial side, you will find all the codes we have mentioned before. So the pearl setting on the bezel, the white enamel dial. The ends are a bit different. Maybe I can come a bit closer so you can enjoy the shape of the ends. And on this one, you have a remarkable enameling work on the back. So you can see the setting work on the enamel on the back, and the central figure represents the goddess Hebe, giving to drink to the Jupiter's eagle, or Jupiter transformed in an eagle. So this representation is very well known, and you have different painting of this. The enameling here might be attributed to a famous Geneva enameler who was called Abraham Lissignol. So it's really, really an artwork. And the specificity of this watch is that it can play 3 different musical tunes. So that's why I call it the 18th century iPod. You can notice you have little pushers around the case. This one at 6 is to choose the tune you want to play. And you have another one at here at 5 that you can, whoops, I have to remove my hand, that you can push to start the music. So what we're going to do is opening the watch, and I will start the music with the apparent mechanism. So this watch is unsigned, but the complexity of the movement and the type of music used here do that we attribute this watch to the Jaquet Droz workshop. So you have the main balance here with the watch mechanism down there, and you have a micro barrel here, which is also the pin cylinder, and the pin cylinder will drive all the music. It will take the hammers here, lift the hammers, and they will hit the bells here. So you have 5 different bells, 5 hammers, and when you actionate the pusher at 6, it will push here to choose the melody. So as you can see, it will change the height of the pin cylinder, and so the pins will catch, so the armors will catch different pins. So let's start it. It's fully winded, so maybe it will be a bit quick at the beginning. So as you can notice, the music style is in Asian style, because those watches were made for Asian market, of course, mostly for China. Maybe we can change melody and I can play another one. It's very similar, but 3 songs for a little watch like this is pretty much. Huh? So sometimes you can have up to 7 different melodies, but it's on clocks. It's on Pierre Jaquet Droz clocks. For a watch, 3 is quite good. Remember that you will need a bigger pin cylinder if you want more musics, more tunes. So you can notice some engravement on the upper plate here. So this one is to wind the music up. This one is to wind the mechanism, and this one is to set the ends. So you will need to open the watch to do this. If we compare this watch to the preview one, you have noticed that where the signature was, you have a protection for the movement, so that the customer cannot put fingers in the watch. On this one, it's not possible. We've seen some watches with a special opening on the enameling that allow the customer to wind through the enameling just by pushing a small aperture and inserting the keys. So let's jump to the last watch I want to present you today. This watch is a contemporary watch from our actual collection. It's a watch released in 2015, and it's the Charming Bird model. So this watch is the legacy of the singing birds from Pierre Jaquet Droz. So as Sandrine mentioned before, Jaquet Droz was specialized in singing birds and singing birds cage in the form of a snuff box or a bird cage. And this watch is the legacy that we've inherited from those pieces. So what we've done here is that we've reduced the mechanism of the singing bird and put it in a wristwatch. So it was really challenging to achieve that. And yeah, we've really won the challenge, because this watch was was given the Great Prize d'Horlogerie of Genève in 2015 for the mechanical exception prize. So this watch have a classical watch movement down there, and the automaton that you can see on the dial, and with the little bird that I will activate later. This is 38-hour power reserve watch, of course mechanical, automatic. Yes, automatic, I think so. And as you can notice, we have an engraving of a bird on the back. This one is numerous clauses 27 and 28. We have two limited series of this watch, one in gray gold and one in red gold, so 28 pieces of each colors. You wind the main movement by the crown at 12. So it will wind the watch and adjust so set the time. And you will wind the automaton with this crown at 2, and you will start it. You can start it by pushing on the button. So enough speaking of the watch, let's enjoy it. So the main challenge to achieve a so small mechanism was to adapt and modernize the technique used before by the Jaquet Droz. So the movement, the bird movement, is achieved by using cams, as we always have done, but for the song of the bird, it was really difficult to obtain enough pressure. So what we've done is that we've swapped the classical leather bellows that were used in all pieces, and we've replaced it by little pistons. Here, as you can see, you have two different pistons. One is compressing the air, and the other is adjusting the tune of the bird. So this mechanism is really an exception. Maybe I will wind it a little bit more and start it one more time. So I'm done with my presentation. I hope you all enjoyed it. And now it will be time for a Q&A with Sandrine and I, and we'll be happy to answer your questions.
Grégoire and Sandrine, thank you for that wonderful presentation. That was really fascinating. I especially enjoyed being able to see the close-up views of these incredible watches. If you'll give me a second here, I'm going to pull up some extra slides. I've got a quick couple things to mention here. And while I'm pulling these slides up, feel free to start entering your questions into the Q&A box that Zoom has near the bottom of your screen. So earlier in the presentation, Dr. Girardier mentioned a specific YouTube video. This YouTube video is a nice overall history of the restoration of the automatons by Pierre and Henri-Louis Jaquet Droz. And if you search for that title on YouTube, you'll find it. It's probably the easiest way to find it. You can also enter the URL directly there. So absolutely check out that video maybe later on. And I've got a special surprise announcement here. This is a very generous gift. So a gift from Jaquet Droz. Dr. Girardier mentioned her book that was just recently published. And as a very exciting giveaway here, the first 28 HSNY members to fill out the form below will receive a complimentary copy of the new book shipped anywhere in the world and available in 3 languages. So you can go right now to that link on your screen, hs-ny.org/Jaquet Droz, fill out the form, and Jaquet Droz will be shipping a book directly to you. It kind of reminds me of back in the pre-COVID days. Often we would have giveaways during an in-person lecture. Well, now we're doing the same thing online, and I want to thank the Jaquet Droz team for making this possible. Okay, so now we can get into the questions and answers portion of the meeting. Again, please enter any questions into Zoom's Q&A box. I can see them starting to fill up right now. So Sandrine and Grégoire will be joined by Claudio Turjanian. He's the brand manager for North America and the Caribbean for Jaquet Droz. So let's take a look at the questions that have been coming in. I'm going to turn off my slide share here just so we can have a clear video of everyone. All right. So the first question here we have from Brendan Cunningham, and the question is, did Henri-Louis Jaquet Droz ever share his thoughts on von Kempelen's chess-playing Turk, which was a puppet masquerading as a mechanical android? Maybe Sandrine, do you have any thoughts on this?
Thank you for these very interesting questions. It is a very good one because they were basically, well, the automatons were contemporary, so the question is certainly worth asking. Actually, as far as I'm aware, Henri-Louis Jaquet Droz didn't openly mention this automaton, but there are a few things that I can say regarding other 18th century automaton, because this question clearly shows that you know that the 18th century was the golden age, well, one of the golden age of the automatons. I didn't mention it earlier, but Henri-Louis Jaquet Droz studied in Nancy, and actually this was quite near Lunéville, so both are places in France. There was an immense lifelike grotto landscape automaton in Lunéville, and it seems quite fair to think that Henri-Louis Jaquet Droz saw this automaton and that it was, well, sort of a source of inspiration for the grotto that he would make later on in the workshop in Chaux-de-Fonds. So this is something that I can say about the source of inspiration for the grotto. And maybe also mention that Pierre Jaquet Droz was in Paris in the 50s. I think it was more specifically in 53. And it seems fair to assume that he saw the automatons of Vaucanson, so the dock and 2 other androids, music playing androids, and which also can be considered as sources of inspiration for the androids that he would later make. So of course he was aware, as well as his son, about what was going on, about the fact that these machines were fashionable, that people were interested to go and see these wonders, mechanical wonders, and that they were ready to pay for them. So it doesn't come just out of nowhere. So even though Henri Jaquet Droz doesn't speak about von Kempelen's fake chess player, probably that he knew about this, and so there is still research to be made, but not as far as I know, and not really in the documents that I could analyze.
Okay, thank you for that. As you were talking, I was just looking back at Google Analytics. So I was looking at people, watching how many people were jumping on the website to take advantage of the book offer. And I'm just noticing a few people are going to the wrong link. So I want to correct it here while we're online. So it's Jaquet-Droz. So put a dash in between. You can see right above Sandrine's head, you see the poster there. So Jaquet-Droz, hsny.org/Jaquet-Droz. And Sandrine, you just reminded me of something that you were discussing during your presentation about the grotto. And this is a question for me, if I may. I'm trying to wrap my head around what would the relative size of this grotto be? Is it something that was small that could fit on a table, or is it something bigger? I'm guessing like a bigger scene with smaller pieces representing statues and parts of the grotto. Do you have any sense of what the overall size of the grotto is or was?
For this question, actually, I have a fairly good idea. I can have more precise figures, but now I don't know them by heart. But I think that I'm not so wrong in telling you that it was probably 1 square meter, actually, in terms of surface. So it was not huge, but still rather big, and probably to be placed on a flat surface and to be part of the show. And actually, it seems that it also had a lot of success during the representations, and that it's one of the reasons why it's often reported in other texts. Well, you have people basically going to visit this show, and then they also write their memoirs and their impressions about the show, and they often also talk quite eloquently about the grotto. So the size of it and the fact that it's quite different, well, it was quite different from the other androids, also certainly made a sensation. And the size of it certainly as well.
I can imagine. I wish it would have survived to today. It would have been incredible to see. So next up, we've got a question. How about this? We've got a more of a technical question for Grégoire. Yes. Jeffrey Powell asks, was having separate barrels for the seconds widely used? Maybe you can discuss a little bit about the idea of having 2 separate barrels in a movement.
The design of the deadbeat second, as it was invented first, has these 2 separate barrels, and it's in the essence or in the design, in the basic design, because you have the classical watch movement, and you have this deadbeat second, which is completely apart. So you need something to put power on the system, and you have a wheel that works with the escapement wheel. On the top of the escapement wheel, you have a cam, and you have a little finger that will push on the side of this cam, and will be liberated each second, and it will do an half a turn. So you need to put power in this system. So that's why you need a second barrel.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for that explanation. Next up, we've got a question from Bill Sanders. Bill asks, when Jaquet Droz married Marianne Sandeau, was Marianne Sandeau related to the Sandeau's family that currently owns Parmigiani Fleurier? Do we know of any relation there?
So I have to be honest, I don't know the exact genealogical tree about the Sando family, even though there are many studies that have been published on this very subject. So I prefer not to answer, well, instead of saying something that might be wrong. But what I can say is that watchmaking families, as the Jaquet Droz and the Sando were in the 18th century, well, intermarriages between these families, of course, were very common, and it can be easily, well, be understood because of the, well, commercial networks, technical expertise that would be shared between the families. So this is something that we can observe from the Jaquet Droz study case, but also from the other 18th century Chaux-de-Fonds families that have been studied by other historians, and actually confirms this matrimonial strategy between watchmaking families at the time. But sorry for not really answering the question in the question.
No problem at all. Thank you for that answer. I'm getting a couple questions here. People are asking again for the URL. So I'm going to bring up that slide once more, just to show the URL so that you can enter it. I apologize. I probably removed it too quickly the first time that I showed the slide. So here's the URL again, if you'd like to visit hs-ny.org. Oh yes, and Claudio is showing the book there. Thank you, Claudio. Okay, so I'll now remove the slide here so we can get full screen view. And maybe for this next question, I'll go to Claudio, and we're going to have a question from Brian Standig. And Brian Standig mentions that it's very obvious that Jaquet Droz enjoys an impressive and storied history. He says, thank you for the lecture and the presentation. It was wonderful. With history in mind, what, in your opinion, does the Swatch Group ownership bring to Jaquet Droz? Have they been able to maintain their independence and ability to experiment in a larger corporate environment? What do you think, Claudio?
Well, I think just by looking at the charming bird that Grégoire showed you earlier, I mean, we're really staying true to who we are, who the brand is. If anything, it gives us stability, having a big group like the Swatch Group to back us and to basically also back the investment of the consumer by knowing that you know, you'll always have a place to have your watch serviced. And the continuation of the creativity is ongoing and forever. So I'm privy to seeing what we're doing in the future, and you know, we have really stayed true to the DNA of the brand, and you can see it in so many of the creations, like right above and behind Grégoire and Sandrine. You see the tropical bird repeater. So I think our creativity has not been affected by one bit. If anything, it's been strengthened, and the Swatch Group is actually a great group to be backing a small, somewhat independent brand like us.
All right, thank you for that, Claudio. Next up, we have, so this is not a question, but more of just a statement from our friend Fortunat Müller-Markay. Fortunat mentions, he just wants to say thank you for this wonderful presentation, and he appreciates that it's directed to a scholarly audience. So that's from Fortunat Müller-Markay, saying thank you very much. And I'm just looking through the questions here. We've got a few more coming in. So here's a question from Bob Frischman. So Bob asks Sandrine, he says, could you tell us more about the research that you did on heritage collections? And maybe asking if it could apply to the 2022 symposium that Bob is working on right now. So Sandrine, any information on heritage collections?
Actually, it's also related to art collections, which aren't necessarily related to watchmaking in this specific aspect, and it's actually more related to my freelance job as a historian, and with knowledge in the history of art as well. I've also worked a few years ago on the history, but not necessarily on the heritage collection, about one watchmaking firm that is called Doxa. But it was very, very long time ago. It's not really related to heritage collection in watchmaking, but heritage collection in the sense, in a more broader sense. Is what I do now, and especially about a contemporary art collection held by a school and presented in a museum-like manner. I'm not sure that this is what you wanted to hear, but there you go.
Well, thank you for that. Okay, let's see what else is here. Oh, this is a fun question. Something that I was wondering as well. Keith Lehman, he asks, is there a collector market for the drawings that the automatons make? This I would love to have one of these automaton drawings hanging on my wall. Is there any way to acquire these drawings now? Are they sold anywhere? What can you tell us?
No,
Claudio is showing something there on his video.
Maybe I can answer, maybe Sandrine will complete, but for what I know, actually, there is not a collector market. Some people are the happy owners of original drawing from the automatons, but most of them are from the 18th century. Some of them are from the 18th century, and most of them are actually drawn by the automaton in demonstrations. So that means it's not very rare. You can maybe they produce one once a month because they do some demonstration with the automatons. But as I know, and for what I've seen in auction sales, I never noticed that drawing from the automatons were sold. But I know some people who have old drawing.
I just wanted to add to that. So when I first, when I was in Neuchâtel last year, I went to the Museum d'Art Histoire in Neuchâtel, and I actually got a couple of these drawings, and I love them, and here we have a couple of different examples. So I was hoping Grégoire was going to say yes, that they go up in value, because I actually have a couple different drawings done by the draftsman and a note written by the writer, and this was the what Sandrine was talking about before, Montutu, and then finally here Les Automates Jaquet Droz at Neuchâtel. So I hope these are valuable. They're very valuable to me, but I hope they're also valuable. So one day, we can auction them off.
For what I know, there are some drawings that disappear. The cams disappeared. So if you have one of these,
they may be valuable.
Yeah, it might be very valuable, but still existing cams are reproducible. So
I just wanted to basically say what Grégoire has just added. Nowadays, basically you have one public demonstration of the automaton once a month. So I know that the demonstrators will offer these small drawings or writings to someone who is particularly enthusiastic among the crowd seeing the automatons. So indeed, these contemporary pieces are not so rare. But what Grégoire just said is that we know that there is a set of cam of the draughtsmen that have disappeared, and that actually could draw the portraits of the of Queen Marie Antoinette. and his husband, basically. And we know this because the descendant of the Jaquet Droz family has a little drawing of this couple in their family archives. So we know that it was basically drawn by or the draughtsman, the original draughtsman, or maybe one of the later androids that would have been made by the Jaquet Droz and Maillardet. But we know that the cams aren't found today. So, well, if one of you knows about this or has something related to this, then could be much more interesting than, well, contemporary pieces, which of course can be dear to the person who has followed the presentation, which remains a great show to witness. And Claudio, you basically well, had this pleasure last year, so good for you.
Yeah, it's great. I love them. I keep them on my desk, and every once in a while I share it with some Jaquet Droz fans.
Yeah, it's not a very common item.
No, it's okay.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing those drawings with us, Claudio, and thank you for the background information, Sandrine and Grégoire. So next up, I've got a question. It's actually two people that asked a very similar question, so I'll try to phrase them together. It's a historical question. So Richard Walden and Greg Kling both asked, was there a portion of time where the automaton business kind of ceased until the Swatch Group purchased Jaquet Droz and revived things? Can you talk us through what that history period was like? About the automaton or the watchmaking business? I'm not sure I did. So they ask actually about both. So what was the timeline for Jaquet Droz like until it was recently revived in modern times? All right. So maybe this first question and then about the automatons later on. And remind me if I lose the thread. I don't know if it's the correct expression in English, but. Yeah. So basically, Pierre Jaquet Droz died in 1790. His son, Henri-Louis, died in 1791, so basically the year after. And Jean-Frédéric Lechaud continued the Geneva workshop because the London workshop had been terminated, let's say. And Lechaud continued to work basically in the same way as he had been working previously with Pierre and Henri-Louis Jaquet Droz for the previous the previous decades. And I have accounting information and correspondence that dates until the beginning of the 19th century, and more specifically 1811. That is why in one of the charts that I showed in my presentation, I mentioned basically 1750 something to 1811, because this is the gap, the timeline of the documentation that I could study. So after 1811, after basically Lechaud stopped his business, there is no more Jaquet Droz business as such. Then during the 60s, but of the 20th century, there had been a creation of not really a brand, but of many Swiss brands combining together into a Jaquet Droz group. And then it didn't actually live for a very long time. And then during the 90s, the name was revived, and it's just later on, so in 2000, that the Swatch Group bought the brand and made it what it is basically today. As for the automatons, they were sold in Geneva in 1785 to French demonstrators who were working in Spain. And in Spain, they were shown to people who wanted to pay for this show. And then there is sort of a gap. We don't know exactly where they ended up, but we know that later on that some figures like Marfels and other collectors got hold of the androids, showed them,
exhibited these automaton, and just at the beginning of the 20th century, they were bought and placed in the Neuchâtel Museum. So it's there are still things to be researched about the exact history and timeline about where the automatons were exactly and when, but we have already some information about who had them, at least towards the second half of the 19th century, before they were bought and basically deposited in Neuchâtel, where they are still today.
All right, thank you for that. That was a comprehensive explanation of the history. Thank you. So I think we've got time for maybe a couple more questions here. Is that okay with everyone else? Just 2 more questions, let's say.
Of course.
All right, Claudia. All right. So let's see here. Let's take a look at. So here's a question from Antonio Leone de Leon. Antonio asks for Sandrine. He asks, what is your PhD domain? What's your background? Was it art history? What were you studying?
Well, actually, it's modern history, and the PhD was on the Jaquet Droz and Les Chaux business history. So I worked basically on the firm documents that exist about the Jaquet Droz 18th century history. So it's more economical history. It's between cultural and economical history about watchmaking in the 18th century. So this is the main focus of the PhD, basically. But of course, modern history since it's not 18th century.
Okay, thank you for that. And so let's go to the last question for today's meeting. So this question is from Bob Frischman. Bob asks, are there any Jaquet Droz examples in in China or Taiwan in their palace museums? So I remember you were mentioning that there was a very big market for Jaquet Droz in China, but are there any examples in the palace museums that you know of?
Well, actually, I should have been going to China last year, but of course, it wasn't possible. But yes, there are a few pieces, well, many Jaquet Droz pieces signed or attributed that are held at the Palace Museum in Beijing. So these are snuff boxes, table clocks, and clock watches. Pocket watches in particular. There is also a drawing automaton which is attributed to Timothy Williamson in London, but it is believed, but I can't tell you precisely because I don't think there are very recent research about the inner mechanism. But it is possible that the inner mechanism is also attributed to the Jaquet Droz workshop in London.
All right. Thank you for that. And I look forward to. I think we all look forward to traveling again. So maybe I can make it to those palace museums at some point in the future and take a look and enjoy.
Yeah, I went there 2 years ago, but there are no clocks signed Jaquet Droz on display, sadly, because as for many museums, most of the collection is hidden. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the pieces Sandrine mentioned are actually not on display mm-hmm. in the museum, but yeah, they are
in stores.
They are in store.
Okay, well, we are reaching the end of today's lecture, and I want to thank everyone from the Jaquet Droz team who was involved. Grégoire and Sandrine in Switzerland and Claudio here in New York. This was a fantastic lecture, and I really appreciate your time today, and really looking forward to seeing some of these beautiful watches and automatons in person very soon. So thank you all again. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Well, thank you, Claudio. Okay, well, have a great rest of your day, everyone, whether you're here in the US or in Europe or anywhere else in the world. Thank you for joining us live Look forward to our next HSNY lecture in June. And again, check out or watch for more news on our upcoming charity auction, June 7th through 14th with Philips. All right, thank you all. Have a great day. Goodbye.